So identity to me has a lot to do, first and foremost, with where I come from, yeah, and who I come from. Not so much who I am now, but when you take into account all those things, the places that my ancestors come from, and the places I've been, mostly the places that I find that I connect to myself. Those things have had a profound influence on who I've become. The people I come from have had an influence on how I think, how I act, how I speak, what I decide to do in my life. And so when it's asked, what do I think about identity? What is identity? Who am I? I have to ask those questions first. Where do I come from? Who do I come from?
Have you seen a change in how we as a Pacific people view identity, especially when we consider people of bi/multi-ethnic backgrounds caused through intercultural marriage or migration?
Oh.
Those are long.
Oh, do you want to jump separately? Because they're listed as one question.
No, yeah, I think it is one. It's fine.
Oh, you got it?
Yeah. Yes, I have seen a change in my own life. I am, I guess you could say, multi-ethnic, multiracial. My father is Tongan, and my mom is Hawaiian Filipino, actually. And so growing up in a multicultural home, on any given day, probably on a Sunday, we could be preparing Filipino food, listening to Hawaiian music after going to a Tongan church program. So that's always been a part of who I am. And I think the problem that we have today is sometimes we feel we got to compartmentalize that. A lot of times outside forces and influencing, how we think says that I got to choose one. Are you Tongan? Are you Hawaiian? What are you? Choose one. And I can't, because they're all a part of who I am. But I think at the same time, how you choose to identify yourself, it still does have a lot to do with where you are, what you're doing, what is it that you desire? What is it that, what goals or, where are you trying to get to? But for me, those who have had problems with identifying or navigating, who am I? That's a big part, is they should learn first, who they come from, where they come from. As a Pacific Islander, there's this deep connection that's really difficult for a lot of people to articulate. So when, I can live thousands of miles across the ocean in, say, in Utah, for instance, but there's always something that pulls me back here. There's always a special place I keep in my heart for Hawaii or for Tonga. I have a good friend. She grew up in a military type of family. And even though she's never stepped a day in her life in Tonga, she can tell you stories about the place her family's from. She can tell you stories of her family in that village. There's a special connection we have because these places are not just seen as places to live in, but they influence everything. Our ancestors are buried there. They're born there, and our lives are intimately connected with what goes on in the land, in the village, in the country. So I think what people in the diaspora and outside of Polynesia, one suggestion from me, not telling you what to do, but one suggestion would be to do that, is to really take a look at those questions. Where do you come from and who you come from? You can also still define yourself how you wish to define yourself. But I think a more complete picture of who you are will be answered by those two questions as well. Yeah.
Many claim that colonization has ceased and that as a Pacific society, we now live in a period of post-colonization. Others, however, would disagree. How has colonization impacted our Pacific identity and how we interpret it? Provide 2 examples.
Yes, colonization has definitely impacted how we see ourselves. Especially in today's world, race has become really a big topic of discussion, and a lot of the ways we see ourselves as Polynesians, as Pacific Islanders, has a lot to do with the influence from the outside world. Sometimes we've had from growing up in the islands, there's a stigma within ourselves about how we look, our skin color, our hair, what we wear, whether we go to church or not. And don't get me wrong, we've gained so much good things from the outside world, but we should not deny as well that there have been negative influences. I believe there's still colonization happening today, but it's not as overt, I would say, as it was before, especially in certain places. Some places back in the past were, colonized pretty heavily, and it was made known, what the policies were and what the outsiders were trying to change and influence. And in other places, the natives were able to combat it better and to stay clear of full, complete dominance from the outside. But today, I think there's still attempts by certain forces, certain peoples, in many different countries, sometimes to stamp out our identities, our unique identities, calling for a colorblind world. Unfortunately, I don't think that's a smart thing to do, to have a colorblind world. We ignore the uniqueness, the differences, the complexities that our peoples have. And when you say things like that, colorblind, you ignore the living experiences that people have that are different from others. To judge according to race, according to color, now that's something we could live without. But to say that we need to think the same, look the same, act the same, speak the same, do all those things, you start to lose the beauties that is unique amongst our different groups. So I would say yes, there's still a lot of colonization going on, but I think I would also argue back, sorry, kind of a long answer, but I would argue back, there's a lot of effort to push back and to strengthen who we are, yeah? And to take a step back and to look at our roots and how that can help keep us strong in our identities.
Why is an understanding of one's identity not only vital to the success of an individual, but also the collective?
I would say that I wouldn't say that anything that would take away from the success and from the happiness and joy and accomplishments people have today that don't have a connection to, say, their Polynesian or Pacific Island roots. There are many people out there who may not speak the language, who may not dress the dress, who might not even know, let's say, something as simple as where their parents are from, a specific village. And I wouldn't want to say that they haven't been successful or they have found some sort of happiness. What I would say and what I would suggest is that being who we are, coming from where we come from a place where relationships and connections is so core and so vital, not only in the past for survival, but also for our people's ability to withstand changes in our environment, our people's ability to be interdependent and to help and to grow together. So what I would say is, what I would suggest is that knowing who you are, knowing where you come from and who you come from has the potential to create a more wholesome self, to add to the joy and happiness you may have. It has the potential to increase who you are, to increase a better understanding of our way of life that is a life of connections. Sometimes a lot of us that live outside of the culture and outside of the islands, we've lost that connection to people. We've lost that connection to place. And although we may be happy, although we may have all the things that we've ever wanted, there can always be more. There can always be more ways that we can reach out and help relatives and countries come up. There's always ways we can reach out and help our environment, the oceans, the land, the animals, the creatures, to come up as well. That's how we see ourselves. Pacific Islanders, it's never about me. You know, I'm happy, I don't speak the language, I don't live the culture, but I'm doing what I gotta do. That's awesome. But I would challenge you and say that there could be more if you were to include in that identity of yourself an identity that's connected and related to everything around you. That will increase your happiness. And so that's what I would say, that there's a potential to add more to it, a more complete sense of who you are.
Academics have proposed that motives behind Pacifica stereotypes / acts like violence, gang affiliation, aggressiveness, etc. is due to a lack of self-identity / cultural principles / values. Would you agree, and if so, why?
I would agree in a lot of parts. In a lot of instances, yes. It is a forgetting, or it is an ignoring of basic values, basic tenets of our culture, and living in a way that's contrary to that. A lot of times, though, I recognize that many individuals, many groups have their own unique stories, their own unique experiences that may distance themselves from what could be called the norm, or the nice families and ways of living, I guess. And so I wouldn't want to, downplay those experiences. But I can testify that when we have an identity grounded in those basic ideas of living a life connected to land, to events in history, when we live a life, or we have an understanding that we are part of a whole, there's greater possibility for you to do more. I think you will be less likely to fall into the traps of living, in a world, a dog-eat-dog world, as they say. Less likely that you fall into those unfortunate pitfalls. Gang affiliation, drugs, drug dependency, alcoholism, violence. When we see ourselves as a part of the Fonua, in Tongan we call it Fonua. Fonua is often translated as the land in dictionaries. But to the Tongan sense, Fonua is the land and the people. You cannot have one without the other. They're intimately, cosmogonically, originally connected. We come from the land. We are part of the land. And when Tongans refer to themselves, the natives, we call ourselves the Tangatai or Fefine Fonua, the people of the land, or the land's people. The land's person, the land's man, the land's woman, whatever. That type of worldview and outlook gives you a greater sense of responsibility. It also gives you a greater sense of empathy and being able to look at the world as not a world of chaos, but a world also of connectivity, connectedness. And so I would say, yes, if we want to help those who have been struggling in those specific areas, those ills that plague our society, one key aspect, one key to the work would be in addressing their connection to the land, to their ancestors, to their families, to the basic values and tenets of their culture.
Why should we as Pacifica put for emphasis on learning, understanding, and practicing our identity? Please provide an example scenario.
Sorry, can you ask it one more time?
Why should we as Pacifica put for emphasis on learning, understanding, and practicing our identity? Please provide a scenario.
Sure. I think we do need to emphasize greatly how the learning of and the living of our culture. One of my mentors, a great influence on my life has always, his quote has always rung true with me, and he's Uncle Emil Wolfgram. He's a Tongan scholar. He was a professor at WCC down in Kaneohe, and he influenced me into thinking, that in this world, this crazy world, that we live in, and I don't remember exactly the quote, but the gist of the quote is that in order to, to get by better in this crazy world, we need to be more Tongan. Tongans, you need to be more Tongan, and so he meant it for everyone. Hawaiians, you need to be more Hawaiian. You need to focus not so much on the hardware, but on the software. You need to focus on the water, not so much the plumbing. Meaning that it is, again, that foundation of who we are can better inform you on where you gotta go, what you gotta do, who you have to surround yourself with, and whose lives do you need to be a part of. Like I said earlier, a Tongan concept of whanua is so central, so key to our understanding of who we are, that it is found throughout our culture, throughout our, even throughout our islands. One way I think that could help, and how we can help people today through emphasizing learning their culture, is through whanua. And one way we articulate whanua is this, what I'm wearing here, my ta'avala. The ta'avala is a Tongan symbol for respect. All Tongans wear it as a way to show humility and respect for the people and the places that we are in, specifically towards our chiefs, and those of higher rank. But another symbol, another thing that the ta'avala represents is the whanua. When we put on our ta'avala, we are literally and symbolically taking upon ourselves the land and the people and wrapping ourselves in it. President Faivaola, President Shamwe, who's president of BYU before, had spoken on that in his documentaries, and that's what it is. That's the view of it in Tonga. This ta'avala, when you learn about your culture and you realize what this means, that our duty, our responsibilities, our identities is very much connected to us being able to wrap ourselves in the people and the land. And then taking the kafa, the rope, and binding the land to ourselves. The rope representing our genealogies, our responsibilities, fatongia, our work, and the aspirations of our ancestors. When you use that as the kafa and you wrap the land to you tightly, you're able to go about and do the things that you need to do. And so I think, when our kids and our even adults outside of the islands can realize that different things like that are part of our culture, were created to teach us on what our priorities should be, where our focus should be at, how we should live our lives, that these are actually tools that inform, instruct, guide, that the world will, as corny as it may sound, the world will be a better place. When people can understand, hey, I'm connected to you, you're connected to me, we're connected to this place, to create true harmony. There needs to be an acknowledgement and a realization that there is those connections and those relationships, and we need to bind those to ourselves. Before I finish, I wanted to emphasize that the Tongan way of thinking and many of the Polynesian way of thinking is that the past is not something that's gone, long gone, behind us. We walk into the future. That's a very foreign concept to the Polynesian people. To us, the past is kimua, that comes before, or it stands before us. To Polynesian people, the past is something that we turn to for guidance. The past and our ancestors and the events before are always, it's cyclical. They're always occurring. Things that have occurred in the past have such great influence on today. People of the past, your ancestors, live on through you. And so we look to the past for guidance. We look to the past for lessons on how we can better navigate a future that's behind us that we don't know. We're in the present. We don't know what the future looks like, so we're not facing it. It's kimui. or behind. And so that's another great example I would offer is that we realize that even our sense of time has been colonized and changed. Our sense of the time and ancestors and the past are cyclical and actually continuous. We are the results of our ancestors, but we are also the ancestors of those to come. You see? So it's continually, in that movement. And if we learn to look at it that way, I do truly believe that there would be a greater propensity, a greater movement by the young people, by all our people, in doing greater things, being better people, having a more harmonious whanua.
Okay. Man, should start a podcast.
Soothing voice.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate